Welcome to a workshop called Water-Wise Gardening with Cheryl and Susan, and here are our presenters.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Kauk, and I've been a master gardener since 2011, and I love everything about gardening, and I'm a little obsessed with it. But it can be challenging, and that's why we're doing this workshop, and I really don't want to be a slave to my garden, so one of the things that I kind of try to focus on is the water-wise emphasis so that I can enjoy a beautiful garden without having to, worry about things dying. So we're going to talk about that today. So now I need to forward my slide here to the next one, and let me just play with it. I got it. I think it's this one right here. There we go. So really, water efficiency is the key. Water is a tremendously precious resource. And, nature, we're really dependent on nature to help us with that. With growing populations and increasing development, it's just essential that we try to preserve as much as we can. And 50% of our water is consumed by landscaping. I did go on the Department of Water Resource line to see, because April 1st is a key time when they actually measure the snowpack and predict, what'll be available. And we are just a tad better than last year, and it is a concern, and this will be a problem. They may start, reinforcing some of the drought restrictions that we have in the past. So even though we've got a little bit better than last year, it's still, we only have about 59% of average as water that's going to be available to us. And basically, our snowpack supplies about 30% of the water for the state each year. So it's going to be a problem. And let me see here. That one? Okay, I'm just playing with my controls here. You want to do it? Okay, go ahead. I'm done. Yeah. So we live in a very special climate here in Nevada County. Typically, we get dry and warm summers, and we have a period of rain-free. So we have to think about that. Our winters can be cool, so we don't have some variation. We get most of our rainfall generally between, between November and April. It's kind of a special area, actually. There's just a few other areas, as you can see from the slide, in the world that have our particular climate. Some of it has to do with our latitude, but a lot of California, not all. And then, of course, it's called the Mediterranean climate because the Mediterranean areas, Greece, Italy, Spain, all also generally experience that. There are some areas in South Africa. There's some areas in central Chile and some areas in southwestern Australia and parts of New Zealand. So what we need to do is, in thinking about the kinds of things that will help our gardens be water-wise, is we want to plan our landscape. We want to think about our design. We want to include hardscaping. Another huge emphasis that we do talk about that I hope we'll be mentioning several times, and I hope you come away with it, is hydrozoning. So kind of having different groups of areas on separate irrigation depending on the needs of the plants. You want plants with similar water needs kind of grouped together so that we don't waste water. Think about reducing lawn areas. And another huge thing to think about is saving water with effective irrigation practices. We do have a couple of workshops coming up on that on the next 2 Saturdays. It's a big topic, so I'm not going to talk about that much, but making sure that we're using water efficiently is really important. And then we're going to talk about mulch. So we're going to go into that a little bit, and then some specific plants. So hardscaping is incorporating areas like walkways and steps to kind of break up and, sorry about that. Yeah, one more. Yeah, sorry. Okay, there we go. Adding areas of interest through, you know, garden type structures, seating areas, borders, you know, beautiful things to look at in the garden. So that's kind of a thing. And then, so what is mulch? Yeah, go back. Oops, I think go forward one. Okay, Susan's helping me with my, maybe I'll do this. Susan. Okay. Okay, so we want to think ahead. Every person, every yard, every, you know, location is going to be a little bit different, but things to think about are playscape areas, meditation areas. What are our goals? How can we do this and do the hydrozoning I talked about? Susan's going to talk a little bit about berms that we can create to help catch some of the water to help a little bit. And again, irrigation. So we all have limitations, and each person, each yard, each climate is going to be different, but deer are a huge factor. Shade versus sun. Homeowners associations also are huge for a lot of us. There's limitations there. Our soil is all different. Our space is different. Our time is different. Money is a very important factor. And then some of us have a little wind we also need to think about. That's not working. Just no. Which one is it? Okay, just roll. This should work. Sorry, a little technical. Okay. So what we want to talk about first is mulch. And mulch is defined as a material that we place on the soil around our plants. And mulch has been shown to reduce water use by 30 to 50%. So you can use all kinds of things for mulch. Composted leaves are good. You can do that. If you have a little chipper, you can run them through. That's ideal, or you can just break them up with a shovel. Wood chips, especially from arborist chippings. I've noticed around the county, a lot of times they're leaving piles of them for people to pick up because they've been doing a lot of work and they have extras. Those are a nice thing to use. Newspapers, cardboard, and compost can also be used. So compost, speaking of compost, so it is the most important thing to support the soil web, which Susan's going to talk a little bit more about. It actually increases the water holding capacity in your soil. So it's really great to mix compost in with your existing soil. It also helps the plants to actually absorb the nutrients. And it helps with even ground temperature, again, retaining moisture, reduces evaporation, suppresses weeds. You can apply it into the soil. You can mix it in with a tuning fork. It has kind of a sponge-like nature. And again, it helps to retain moisture and provide nutrients. If you use compost and mulch together, you're actually going to double your impact. And the science says that you can actually reduce your water by 70%.
Now, interestingly enough, you know, you have all your plants on the surface, but the most fascinating thing goes on underneath your feet. And we're learning a lot more these days about the soil web. Now, the soil web is a very complex arrangement. Who eats whom? First of all, you have your plants, and you have even roots that exude certain sugar compounds specifically designed to attract a certain bacteria. So they almost have a symbiotic relationship with the bacteria who die, release the nitrogen that is uniquely absorbed by that particular plant. It's a very sophisticated, complex, and fascinating area. And then as you can see from this chart, you have other things that feed on the bacteria that die, that then get fed on by other insects and ultimately by the animals and eventually by us at the top. So again, a very complex situation, vital to the health of your plants and very dependent on the compost that Cheryl was talking about. It's when well established, it helps the soil hold the water as well as nutrients that are available to the plants. It also supports healthy plant growth and can reduce disease, because as we all know, a healthy person can resist disease much better than somebody who has immune compromise or is sick. Now, lawns, as Cheryl mentioned, are a huge factor. Our lawns fascination really goes back to our European background, where you see pictures, of beautiful sweeping lawns in the English countryside. Well, they have rain. They have rain in the summer, people, and it rains a lot there and often. We aren't there yet. I mean, this is not our climate, as Cheryl described. It's a Mediterranean climate. So we have to respect where we grow and look at what really is going to be to our benefit. Why do we need a lawn? And many people do need lawns for specific purposes, but we have to remember how much time, energy, and resources they involve. We need fertilizer for most of your turf grasses. The fertilizers leach into the ground, frequently wash out, do disrupt the soil web that's naturally inherent there. Plus, they make the grass grow greener and faster, so you have to mow more often. So how do you want to spend your time? That's something you need to think about. And also to be aware that a typical lawn uses 10,000 gallons above and beyond your normal rainfall. You're pulling an awful lot of water from whatever you have available. So there are some low-growing native grasses available that if you really want a patch of lawn for any certain reasons, they use much less water. In fact, many companies are researching and developing turf and seed combinations to meet these new needs that we have in the drought combinations. If you have a lawn, I would recommend that you set your mower higher, certainly above 4 inches. One reason for that is that if you set it higher, it shades off seeds that may contain weeds. So you're in effect helping, to control your weed population. Leave your clippings. That's food for the plants. That's going to be, recycled. Your chemical fertilizers you need to use very carefully, and you consider the pros and the cons. And the cons are that they can damage, as I've said, the soil web composition and just make your job harder. There's a quote from a man, Doug Talmy, that wrote a book, Bringing Nature Home. And I think this really came home to me. If we cut lawns in half nationally, we could create more than 20 million acres of new habitat. That's greater than all of the national parks combined. Now, what he means by that is, and in his book, he talks about creating a natural habitat in your own environment, whatever that may be, to encourage wildlife, pollinators, and so forth. So it's something to think how we're impacting our environment by doing this, reducing the lawns. Okay, so if you have a lawn, why? Maybe you just like to sit out and look at the green grass. Maybe your children like to play soccer or kick a ball around or whatever. Do you have certain hobbies or sports that involve a lawn? Cheryl pointed out some beautiful hardscaping features that may take up some of the space and really make it more habitable for you. Now, you might want to playscape, treehouse, sandboxes, climbing tools, something for the children to play on. Do you want a putting green? Okay, well, then you might even consider a strip of artificial turf. Lawns can work well for sloping yards. However, it is a little harder to mow, and there are other good erosion control things available. Now, one caveat, if you're going to reduce your lawn, if you have trees that the lawn butts up to, you have to remember that those trees become very dependent on the water that was needed to support the lawns. So when you don't have a lawn, you don't need as much water, which is one of our goals. And so the tree is saying, who turned off the faucet? What am I going to do now? So you need to kind of gradually reduce that, but continue to water your trees until they can kind of adjust to that. So don't just throw them into that deep end. Okay, one of the ways to reduce lawns, and we do have a program that has been recorded that goes into a lot more detail on this on our website. You can dig it up. You can do lasagna gardening, and this workshop does go into much more detail about that and gives you some really interesting techniques. Plant small trees here and there. The hardscape areas, I love the creativity you can get with different things you can put there. Look at the blend of plants that may give you some visual interest as well as lower maintenance, different heights, foliage, color. Consider succulents. Some of the grasses that might work better for you are fall under these different families: fescue, sedges, clovers, a great ground cover. It's going to stay there once you decide to put it in, so think carefully. Mondo grass, lorope, and certainly please consider our native grasses, which are well adapted to this area. This is what I'm talking about as far as you don't have a sweeping lawn. You've got a much more visual attraction there. You see the different flower groups, you see different grasses, you see different foliage, and it just is much greater visual impact, plus covers the space there, maintains your water table better, and supports our native wildlife. And we really have to respect that we're part of a bigger ecosystem, including bugs, insects, I'm sorry. I was corrected on that. It's not a bug, it's an insect. Now, this is one alternative, particularly for sloping gardens. Berms are things like a small hill that's kind of mounted up at the base to kind of collect water. This is a rain garden, and as you can see, there's a bit of a slope. It kind of cuts into this, which adds a visual attraction, but also helps hold the water in the soil. A very useful technique, to help maintain your water table, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about native plants, because they are typically plants that will do generally, if you look at your particular microclimate and look at what native plants grow there, they can be very water wise and do well with minimal care. So the definition of water-wise or of native plants, I'm sorry, plants that are basically indigenous to your specific given area. And they're plants that have developed or occur naturally or existed for many years in a particular area. These are some native grasses, Santa Barbara daisy, and I'm going to go into more detail on some specific plants that I think do well in most of Nevada County. Not all, because some people live at higher elevations or lower elevations, but that's to come. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about water management specific to your type of soil, because there's some key things you need to think about. So if your soil is more clay, it's going to actually retain water, have a lot of nutrients, but it is going to require a slower drip, because if you give it too much water too fast, it's going to, just drain off the surface and not absorb into the soil. So clay requires a little bit less water. It retains the water, but you need to do a slower drip. Sandy or rocky soil, completely opposite. It's going to drain really fast. You're possibly going to need to give it more water, because it's going to lose the water quicker. And so with the emitters that you have, or the watering system you have, you're going to want to give it a little bit more. Basically, mulch can help with that. So look at your individual plant needs, of course, with your water management, the root depth of your plants, the period of growth, that kind of thing. And always with young and newly planted plants, they are going to need more attention and more care. Some times as master gardeners, we prepare ourselves when we put in new plants, and we say the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. And I have found that to be so true. And of course, weather is a huge factor too. There's things related to how hot it is that we'll have to pay attention to. Major points to water-wise is thinking about the correct plant, and then thinking about the location. Is it, in sun or shade? And then the appropriate water techniques, drip versus spray versus hand watering. And then the mulching, again, we're emphasizing mulching because it's really key. So appropriate irrigation systems, you're going to have to figure that out depending on the type of plants you have, the type of soil, as I just mentioned. We want to only give the plants as much water as they need to conserve the water. We want to water slowly, return to allow the water to soak in. Generally speaking, avoiding overhead spraying conserves water. I know that we are going to continually emphasize, I'll just not repeat some of these things on the slide on the right. We've already talked about them, but those are the key points and things you need to think about. So considerations, we talked about particular plant species, native plants do well, Mediterranean plants that do well in Mediterranean areas. If you have more dense plants, you're going to have to think about more water. Your individual microclimate is huge, and so everyone is a little bit different. You'll have to think about that. Shady areas lose less water. Plants that are close to buildings and pavement, particularly if it's a hot day, require more. And trying again to put our plants with like water needs in groupings, and then the soil types. So we've just reemphasized a lot of the things because those are key. So, you know, it's been, this hand watering is an interesting thing. You know, I know that's not possible for a lot of us, especially those that like to go away for a while, but hand watering can actually save over 30% of the water. So if you are a person perhaps that is home and you can hand water, it has some benefits. It can save a lot of water. It gives you a chance to check on your plants. It gives you a chance to enjoy your plants and spend time with them, which is the whole purpose of having a lot of these kinds of, you know, beautiful gardens. So some people say the best fertilizer is actually the footsteps of the owner. So we want to monitor our plants if we're walking around. It gets us outside in the sunshine, and it's great mental health therapy. So I'm going to go into now some details about different characteristics to look at when you're choosing your plants. So basically characteristics of water-wise plants are that they have tiny, some of them have tiny little leaves, or they have little needles. Generally speaking, minimal leaf surface area, so smaller leaves. Obviously, if you have a bigger leaf, that plant is going to lose more water. Leaf waxes are inherent in some plants to kind of help protect them. A couple of, they reflect light. A couple of examples would be like camellias and also maybe holly. That would be a plant that has leaf wax. Plants that have deeper roots also help to protect the plant. And also plants with little tiny leaf hairs. Often these plants are kind of in gray, white, or silver, and they basically reflect light and decrease the water loss. Plants with deeper sinuses in the leaves, for example, a maple leaf, some of them are pretty big, but they do have these indentations in the leaves that actually help prevent some water loss. And then there's actually some plants, for example, some of the hibiscus type plants, they actually close their leaves to protect themselves. So some plants do that. So here's an example of lamb's ears. That's the tiny little trichomes, the little hairy gray silvery. Those do quite well actually. And this plant I love. If you can find it, it is a native, California native. Once you get it going, it's going to do well, but it will take a couple years to kind of spread. It is self-spreading, but minimally, very easy to control. It has the tiny little gray leaves, and it has this wonderful little white flower. I love this plant. This is yarrow and lavender. I just wanted to mention on the lavender one thing about the mulch. I had a hard time with my lavender for a while because it seemed like it just didn't do that great. It likes, when you're planting it, if you can, just plant it with maybe about at least a third to a half gravel in the soil that you mix it before you plant it. It really requires drainage, really good drainage. So if you have a clay soil, oftentimes it gets kind of a fungus thing and it doesn't really like that. But if you add the gravel or sand in there, it does much better. But then with a mulch, you want to actually be sure that you don't have the mulch really close to the plant around the base of it. It really loves to breathe. So just a little note of caution there with the lavender. So plant choices to consider. We talked about natives, but I do want to tell you that only some natives are drought tolerant. It depends on where the plant evolved and the site conditions. Perennials versus annuals. UC Davis has something called, and you may see them at some of the nurseries, called All Stars. And I think I talk a little bit more in detail about those on another slide, so I'm not going to go into detail. Many plants from arid parts of the world do well. I mentioned that before. In general, the Mediterranean plants are good choices for the foothills. Think outside the box. Susan mentioned that there's a lot of wonderful grasses and herbs that do well sustaining themselves. On the grasses, though, be sure that it's a grass that is more for dry conditions as opposed to wet, because they do vary. So also think about color, shape, and texture. Mixing and contrasting colors and mixing and contrasting shapes really make your plants pop. So that's another consideration. It's ideal, if you can, to plant in the fall. Fall planting allows the plants to get established with their root systems before the heat of summer. So it gives them at least a few months to do that. Also, it's cooler temperatures, so you don't have to pay quite as much attention. There's less moisture lost. We get the rainfall, and so that helps a lot. Ideally, fall is the time to plant. However, I will tell you, in theory, it is, but the nurseries don't stock up the plants the way they do in the spring. So it does become a bit of a challenge to do that. You can buy the plants and protect them and then get them in the fall. But if you're doing a big project, it can be a little more challenging. So the UC Davis All-Stars that I mentioned, these are really tough, reliable plants that have been tested. They're easy to grow in general, low water needs. They have few problems with pests and diseases. They're also designed to, have a lot of them some color all year round. There's many of them are California natives, not all. UC Davis has a fabulous arboretum and a plant nursery you can visit. And they do have, this year because of COVID, they do have a couple of plant sales coming up. You can just go into their website. I actually think one is coming up later this month, and it is, you order online and then you drive by to pick up your plants. But they have 2 different weeks that they're doing that in the upcoming future here. So this is a wonderful website, calscape.org, super useful resource. It's developed by the California Native Plant Society, and it helps you to find plants very specific to your area. Basically, you put in your address and your zip code. They give you a list of plants that are native to your area, and then they tell you about them and their water requirements and whether they actually break it down, sun, shade, soil requirements. So really, if you don't write down anything else and you're looking for a resource for plants, this one's great. So this is one of my favorites. I love the monkey flower, another mimulus is the other name for it, and Shasta's sulfur buckwheat. I actually took this picture in a garden that hadn't been watered for 7 years, and I just love these plants. And this is Kenyan snow iris. It is a vigorous and adaptable plant. It can go in sun or shade, and it's just lovely, quite amazing. It divides nicely, so it's a good one. Carpinteria californica. It's a native plant to California, and it produces these lovely white blossoms for a good long time. Again, this is that same garden that wasn't watered in 7 years. So we have some penstemons. I think this is Margarita Bop, it's called. More Kenyan snow iris, and coral bells are in the foreground there. Here is a picture of our site in Grass Valley at NID where the Master Gardeners have a demo garden. This is some nice fire pokers, which are another one of my favorites. There's lots of different varieties. They do really well with just hardly any care at all. There's some berberis and I'm not sure what the gray one, maybe Santolina or something in the back. Okay, yeah, okay. This is Jupiter's Beard. One of my favorite combinations actually is California Fuchsia, Jupiter's Beard, with a little bit of that monkey flower mixed in. You mix them all together and you will get a season of about 5 months of color. And they're just lovely plants to put together. This is our milkweed, which the monarchs feed on. And that's California Fuchsia. And it is a fabulous plant. And it will spread by roots underground after it's established. Not crazy, just a nice spread. So you'll have lots of little starts. In this plant, it doesn't start to bloom until really late, maybe beginning of August, but it will bloom for a good 3 months, and it's a lovely one. So a little more about groupings of plants with similar water requirements, the hydrozoning concept. Think about the water needs. If you give some of these plants too much water, it can actually kill them. So you don't want to water more than you really need to. Again, the first year, the plants do need extra care and extra observation, and trying to plant plants with similar water needs, as we've mentioned several times. And you can monitor your water needs in a variety of ways. You can kind of feel the ground. It's a good idea to water deeply, less often if you can. And there are commercial water meters you can buy that are relatively inexpensive if you want to. But your soil type, again, is critical in, determining all of that. So.
I did mention earlier about the value of trees. They are one of our most valuable commodities as far as landscaping and as far as environmental impact. So we really want you to kind of think carefully about this. Use the right choice. Ideally, a low water one, native or drought resistant trees, and there are many available. I would suggest even just consider planting trees instead of lawns. Shade, aesthetic appeal, environmental impact. They release so much oxygen, take in carbon dioxide for us. So they really work well with our environment to help us with our environmental impact here. Choose the right trees. Small trees usually are going to start off better. It's usually a little bit better to get a little smaller one and just take care of it. But again, it is going to need to be watered a little bit more often. And I would suggest that when you're watering it, remember, trees have roots that extend far out. It doesn't really help them as much to put the hose right at the base of the tree. You really need to have water emitters around the base, the drip line of the tree to reach all the roots. Watering at the right time, in the morning or at dusk, there's less water lost to evaporation. The air conditioning cost is enormous if you have your trees. In my house, I have trees on the east and west, hardly ever use my air conditioning. And once it's established, the tap roots go way, way down to reach our lower water tables. And so you really use less water to keep them going after a couple of years that they've really begun to be well established. Reduces your lawn size, and of course the decorative value you can't underestimate. Many small trees adapt easily to landscaping. So think about the red buds, the crepe myrtles, many other choices for you at the nursery. Now, of course, when you're looking at gardening, tomatoes are the first thing that you think of. And again, think Mediterranean vegetables, tomatoes, eggplant, peppers, so forth. When they're mature, they will do actually much better with infrequent watering schedules. With my tomatoes, after they get up and they're fairly well established, even beginning to blossom, I water them maybe only once every couple of weeks sometimes, but I let a drip system and I let it run for a couple of hours. So I get way down to the roots. I make the roots really stretch out to get the water where they really can have a little bit more of option on that one. Of grow only what you need. I mean, do you really like a whole row of turnips? Are you going to eat all of that? Just think about carefully what your family is interested in doing. Now, there are critical watering periods, just like little children. Watering plants when they're young and beginning to grow, they're going to need a little bit more frequent watering, maybe not quite so much, but they are going to need fruiting. And when they start producing fruit, they may need some more water early in the morning. And again, group plants that need the less water together as opposed to the ones that need a little more. And we talk about compost and mulch again. Cheryl and I have just beaten this over the head throughout this because it's so critical when you're looking at soil health as well as water retention and absorption in your ground table. Some of my favorite water-wise vegetables, and we do have quite a choice. Asparagus, once you get those started, they really can kind of take care of themselves and actually don't require that much water. So cucumbers, perhaps beans, okra, squashes do well with low water use. You have a lot of choices. And it's also just fun to stick some of your vegetables in with your ornamentals. I have some Japanese maple tree that I've planted charred around the base of it. I had this space, and so it's really adds quite a visual impact to the whole planting arrangement. Remember to use the same light and water requirements. This maximizes your space that you have available, and it is kind of fun just to go out and trim a few, leaves for a salad or whatever. You maximize your water use because if you're going to water one plant, you're going to get the rest of them that surround it, including your edibles. This is an example of where they have stuck some vegetables in with some of their plantings. And there's some kind of, we think it's a chicken. Cheryl and I've discussed this quite often. Our best bet's a chicken there. That didn't come out very well. But again, you can see how attractive all the visual variety of colors and shapes add to this bedding in this yard. Now, the key points, just to summarize our talk that we really want you to take home with this, are hydrozoning. Plant the plants that need the water in the same area so that you maximize your water use. Look at your choices carefully, and we've given you several examples. It's important to know your soil. Is it clay, sand, mix, serpentine? And we do have resources for that available on our website. Limit your turf areas. I've mentioned how much water they can consume and that you can use your available area for other things. Water early in the day. Look at your irrigation choices. Remember, we have 2 classes. This is such a complex system, a topic that we've divided them into 2 parts, and they will air next Saturday and the Saturday after that. Did we say compost and mulch again? Yes. Again, we want you to really take this point home. We thank you for your time, and we are available for any questions that have come in later. So you have the chat line caught, and we're welcome. And Cheryl and I are both here to help you answer any of your questions about this. I'm going to turn it back over to our host, Lisa.
Thank you, Susan. Sylvia, did you get any questions during the workshop?
Okay. Is straw a good mulch?
It is. However, as far as mixing it into the soil, there are some pros and cons to that, but covering the soil, it is a good mulch. It does, depending on the type that you get, have some concerns with the weed seeds that might be in it.
Oh, and also we recommend that you not put more than 2 or 3 inches, because then you get kind of an overload of stuff. And also, while we're talking about working it into the soil, we've mentioned briefly the turning forks, where you dig those just gently into the soil. Remember when I was talking about the extensive network in the soil web? What I didn't include was the fungal involvement. And these little fungal hyphas, what they're called, if you consider them kind of roots for the fungus, they're very extensive. And when you till, you break up this connection, and then they have to reestablish this. So this is why we don't recommend tilling routinely. Tilling is very useful if you're going to break up the ground initially to get your garden started, but then we suggest using that turning fork to maintain the integrity of the soil web. The compost again will filter in but overloading it can actually be detrimental. So I recommend putting maybe 2-3 inches tops of the compost on top, but then covering it with mulch. And you can use so many things for mulch. Straw, rice straw works well. Certainly, leaves are my favorite because they'll break down. Rice, the straw is a little slower. Even newspapers will help too. Cardboard. You can use some of the plastic coverings.
Her question was specifically about, you know, which
Straw.
straws you mentioned.
Rice straw is usually the one we use. Very slow to decompose, though.
You know, one that I've used that I found to be wonderful for the soil because it does break down is alfalfa, actually.
That's a
But
very
you
good
do
idea.
get-
Mhm.
You do get some seeds.
That's what I
if
was
you
going
turn
to
it
ask.
into soil in the spring, you know, it's great for the soil, for rebuilding the soil.
Because remember, the alfalfa it does contain a lot more nitrogen. So that's to kind of support Cheryl's point about being much better for the soil.